California is going to become an island, or California is going to break off and fall into the ocean. Yeah, no, that is completely untrue. So it doesn't have enough surface area of the fault to ever produce anything in a magnitude. The big
Okay.
one though would be about magnitude 7.9, magnitude 8. That's kind of the ceiling for a full extent rupture on the sand.
Hi, everybody. Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Bryan Castillo. He is a professor at Cal State San Bernardino, and he teaches geology and natural disasters. And the question that he's going to be answering for us today, when is the big California earthquake? When is it coming? Is it already here? Do we not know about it? And how do you prepare for it as well too? So we're going to be giving you a little bit of history of earthquakes. What are they? Can you detect them? Can you not detect them? What are some of the largest earthquakes that have occurred? But most importantly, he's going to be answering the question that we all want to know. When is the big one coming? You want to stay to the end because he's going to answer that. So welcome to the show, Bryan. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, man. I'm super excited to have you on. Just because I know that there's a lot of misinformation as it relates to earthquakes. And I know that that's one of those topics that can really freak people out. So welcome to the show. For our viewers that don't know who you are, who is Bryan Castillo and how did you get involved in geology and natural disasters?
So, hello again. My name is Bryan Castillo. I'm an earthquake geologist, so I specialize in neotectonics and uh, more a subdiscipline called paleoseismology, which is looking at prehistoric earthquakes on specific faults and seeing how they behave throughout time, which can give us a really good idea on how often they're rupturing, what the size of the magnitude is, and kind of just a good idea of what the deformation might be in a large earthquake on that fault. And this ties into natural hazards in seismic hazards in California to help people prepare to create seismic hazard maps based on locations and multiple uses. So I also do I do a lot of geocommunication. So one of my biggest goals of my Earthquake Dude page, that's my alter ego, is Earthquake Dude, is to spread positive information, is to debunk fake myths and things, misconceptions that people have on earthquakes and disasters and things like that. And then also I want to teach people how to prepare properly for a big earthquake, because sooner or later it's going to happen.
That's awesome, man. And the reason I came across your page is there was a recent earthquake. I can't remember the location of it. And obviously, there was a lot of deaths. A lot of the buildings came down. And I started seeing on my TikTok different people saying, oh, look, the California earthquake is actually coming in 2 weeks. This is how we know this guy predicted this other earthquake or predicted these other earthquakes. So let's just start off there. Can you actually predict an earthquake? Why yes or why not?
The straight up answer is no. No. It's an impossible task to try to predict an earthquake. There's just so many variables that come into factor when it comes to trying to do something as complex as predicting an earthquake. And I always tell people this: in order to successfully predict an earthquake, you have to give an exact time, an exact date, a magnitude, and a location of the epicenter of that earthquake, which is pretty impossible to do, considering how complex these features are. And there's just not going to be, there's no technology right now that'll even allow us to come close to even coming, to try to predict earthquakes. So, yeah, the straight up answer is no. Anybody that says they do, there's just so many complexities to it that, yeah, I just, we just get tired of hearing people trying to use planetary geometry or or or, or this, fake pseudoscience methods, that are not peer reviewed, they're not published, and there's a reason why they're not published, is because no scientist with would ever agree to that, or be like, yeah, this makes sense.
So if we can't predict like actual earthquakes, like how does a study of earthquakes go about? Like what do you guys actually do? Like when you study different fault lines, like what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
So the purpose is, so we know faults produce earthquakes, and faults are tiny part of the big picture of what's happening. If you go back to your earth science classes, you learned about plate tectonics and how at plate boundaries you have seismic activity because the plates are moving. Well, we stick to that fundamental right there. What we do day to day is that we can study faults to understand how they behaved in the past. So essentially, we can look at the old earthquakes in the past to get a good understanding on how often that fault's moving, because faults that move faster produce earthquakes more frequent. And we saw that in Turkey. That's the Turkey earthquakes that
Yeah.
just happened recently. They have some really fast moving faults, and they're a very seismically active location. So a earthquake of these magnitudes, they weren't shocking to us. What came shocking was the aftermath and the building codes, and things that we probably will get into later. But the whole point is to assess seismic hazards for places that get earthquakes, and that way we can prepare people as much as possible, because one, we don't know when they're coming. We know they're coming because historically they happen all the time, and they will happen again in the future. The problem is we don't know exactly when, but what we can do with this allotted time is prepare ourselves, so when it does happen, we're in the best possible position so that we can survive.
So, what's the history of California earthquakes, and what are some of the major faults or some of the different plates in California?
So California is special because it lies on a actual tectonic plate boundary, meaning not only is it a fault, but it's a boundary between two massive tectonic plates. That's known as the San Andreas Fault. It's the most famous fault in California. Everybody knows about the San Andreas, but there are other dangerous faults all around California that have a potential to produce large earthquakes as well. But for now, we'll stick to San Andreas. San Andreas is about 1,300 kilometers long. It runs from like the Salton Sea all the way to Cape Mendocino. So it runs through the spine of California. Now, what we've noticed historically is that the San Andreas Fault doesn't rupture all at once, meaning it actually ruptures in different segments, and we've seen that. In 1906, San Francisco got hit with a magnitude 7.9 earthquake, and that was the northern section of the San Andreas Fault. The central section, you have the Fort Tejon earthquake in 1857. That was also magnitude 7.9. Now, here's the problem: is that Southern California itself, the southern section hasn't ruptured in well over 300 years.
Oh,
That's how we
wow.
know, statistically speaking, that we are at a higher risk of a large earthquake on the southern section of the San Andreas Fault, because it hasn't ruptured in a good 300 years.
So, what's some of the we talked about? Obviously, the one up north that happened. What about the Northridge earthquake? Was that not part of the same San Andreas fault, or does that not get factored in the 300 years?
Yeah, no, that is a completely different fault system. It was in the Northridge or the North Hills or Northridge blind thrust fault. So the San Andreas fault controls the tectonics around California, but because we have that major boundary, there's a lot of deformation that's happening all around us. You can see that with the hills and the streets, the mountains, and because of that, you get other fault systems that form, and uh, they're they're mostly independent, but in large scale of things, they are a result of the San Andreas deforming California. But yeah, that doesn't count. That was a completely separate system.
Yeah. Okay. And then obviously like I've seen like videos of or I've heard things and I excuse my ignorance on this. I've seen things of like showing that a part of California like splits off or something like that. Is could that actually happen? And can you go a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, totally. That's actually one of the top misconceptions I hear on a consistent basis is California is going to become an island, or California is going to break off and fall into the ocean. Yeah, no, excuse me, that is completely untrue. If you were just to look at a map of California, it just structurally doesn't make sense for like a piece to fall off. And even if you don't want to believe that, what I can show you is that historically we have massive earthquakes on the San Andreas all the time, and California is still here, right? If it actually worked that way, we would have been knocked off 25 million years ago on the initiation of the San Andreas Fault. So yeah, that's not possible. Yeah.
What is the largest earthquake that has ever occurred? I don't know if you know that information. And then,
Yeah.
like, when people say, is the big one coming? Like, is that like just 7.9? Is that like an 8? Is that a 6? Is that a 10? Like, what could people expect?
So the biggest earthquake in recorded history, meaning we were around and there's written records of it, was in 1916 off the coast of Valdivia, Chile. It was a magnitude 9.5. I'm talking about whopper of an earthquake. That's incredible amount of energy released. That was the biggest earthquake. Now, so that in general terms, that's what we call a subduction zone earthquake, and that's because essentially the plate is being pushed into the earth, so you get these really deep earthquakes. And the deeper the earthquake, that means the more surface area there is for the fault to rupture on, and surface area is directly proportional to magnitude. So the more area of the fault that breaks, the higher the
Mhm.
earthquake magnitude of the earthquake will be. Now, here in California, we actually don't have tectonic setting. We actually just have what we call a strike slip or a transform boundary, where the San Andreas basically is the boundary of two plates that are just sliding right past each other. So it doesn't have enough surface area of the fault to ever produce anything in the magnitude nines. The big
Okay.
one though would be about magnitude 7.9, magnitude 8. That's kind of the ceiling for a full extent rupture on the San Andreas fault.
That makes sense. And then you said that there's different types of earthquakes as well, too. Or are those the only two different types of earthquakes, or can you go over the different types of earthquakes just for consumers to understand?
So all earthquakes are the same. What's different is the boundary or the type of movement of the plates, right? So there's three of them. Like I mentioned, there's subduction or convergence when two plates are being shoved together. Then there's the splitting apart, which is the whole hype what we've seen in Africa. Have you seen those videos?
I
They're
have
like,
not.
oh, Africa's splitting apart. So that's what we call a rift valley. It's our divergent boundary. So the plates are just moving away. And then what we have here in California is just the two sides of California are just sliding right past each other.
Yeah. Now, some people say that or obviously you said that you can't predict an earthquake. Can animals actually sense when earthquakes are coming?
No, I think no, yeah. There's just no uh, there's not enough scientific evidence to back that claim. What I will say is that animals do have more keen senses, so they can feel vibrations before you do, which is why you'll see them. They might react before you do, and then a few seconds later, you'll feel the actual vibrations, and you're like, "Oh, we're having an earthquake." Yeah, but my dog felt it before me. That's just really what it is. But again, until good old Sparky comes up to you and says, hey man, tomorrow we're having an earthquake at 9 p.m., then I'm not gonna believe it.
Yeah. And then, how do you actually know, like you may not be able to know, obviously, how big it's going to come or when it's going to come. Obviously, you can be due for one, but how does, like, let's say a homeowner um know whether their house is more prone to be on an earthquake fault line? Is there like a website that they can check? How do people look can look at that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's one thing that I emphasize in my teachings at my university is I encourage my students to look up where they live, and see what are the natural disasters around them. Right. So all you have to do, it's super simple. This is all public information. All you have to do is go to the California Geological CGS, the California Geological Survey, right?
Hmm.
And they have a earthquake interactive map, right? So it's a really useful map tool that you can plug in your zip code, and it'll take you there, and it'll show you, are you near an AP zone, which is, are you near a fault line? Are you near a place that's prone to liquefaction, or are you near a place that's prone to landslides? So it's really useful. You can look up where you live, or even when you're potentially trying to buy a house, you can be like, okay, well, I want to get a house in Long Beach, right? And you'll see that if you go into Long Beach, most of those areas are prone to liquefaction.
So, are there any rules of thumbs, like don't buy a house within X miles of a certain type of fault or X miles of certain liquefaction locations?
I think my rule of thumb would be more on the age of the house, when it was built. Anything dating, predating 1933, are very vulnerable structures to ground shaking. But over the course of California history, we've implemented lots of laws and improved earthquake engineering, that I'm confident to say that newer structures are going to be fine, especially now that we are, where it's illegal to build on top of active faults.
That's awesome. I love the answer to that. I was more like on the how structurally sound the property is versus how close. So, are you saying that a house could almost be like on the San Andreas Fault, and if it's built up to today's code, it might still stand, or or
Yeah,
does
I
it
mean,
have something?
as long as it's not on the fault itself, because that's when you get into really dangerous territory. You can have really top-notch engineering, but if it's on top of the fault, that surface rupture will destroy the house. But if you're near it, yeah, we have pretty good code that I'm confident that the structure will survive. I mean, my university, Cal State San Bernardino, we're 1 kilometer away from the San Andreas Fault. And I'm confident this building won't fall. I'm sure there'll be some residual damage, but yeah, I feel pretty safe here.
So, what is liquefaction? Um, what is it?
So liquefaction is this secondary effect to earthquake shaking. So just the best way to put it is the ground behaves like jello, right? Almost like quicksand jello kind of attire. And the reason why is that in places uh, loose unconsolidated sediments, so like in valleys and basins, um, uh, near the beach where you have a lot of sediment with a lot of pore spaces, and if you have a lot of water saturation, and you just get that big earthquake, that water literally comes back up to the surface, and it could start like sinking buildings and vehicles. Yeah, it's a pretty gnarly thing to see, and you can Google some pictures of liquefaction. You see, how it swallows cars in whole, and how it tilts buildings and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
like
I saw a video. My wife sent me a video of a car like going in a sinkhole
yeah,
recently. So
yeah.
I just didn't know the proper name for it. Whenever you're on California Geological Survey, CGS, like,
Mhm.
is there anything else like when you're on that website that you should be looking out for? And I'm talking about real estate because obviously we buy real estate and we sell real estate for a living. So, like, as consumers, is there anything else that they should be looking at aside from faults, liquefaction, or anything like that?
When specifically if we're talking about hazards, I think those are the three main things. But they do have a lot of great resources. I know you can find information to like um, to other external links and other groups that give out grants to seismically retrofit your house. So there is a lot of other resources for sure that you can spend some time looking through the website that'll send you to a lot of external resources. We all
So it
work
base
with these agencies. Yeah,
so if somebody has a house that's 1933 or older or something that maybe is not up to code, there's actually grants out there that will help you in advance to almost like retrofit your house to make it up to standard.
yep, exactly.
I love
um,
that.
the website that I would recommend for anybody to check out, if that's something that's interest, is Earthquake Country Alliance. We have tons of resources. It's a lot of agencies that come together to make California a better place when it comes to seismic hazards. And I've seen lots of grants, up to $3,000 that will help homeowners seismically retrofit their house.
I love it. Now, what can homeowners do to prepare, if anything, for like a big one?
Yeah, good question. So the first things first is securing your home. That's one of the really pretty important things that you can do. So securing your home can mean strapping down bookshelves, heavy furniture, mounting your TV to the walls, studs on the wall. You can get those child locks. This one's my favorite. This one's underrated. It's child locks on your cabinets and shelves. That way, when the ground shakes, they're like nothing's flinging out. Broken dishes, broken cups. Which broken glass is just a bad idea having in the floor. So you can do a lot of things like that, right? Learn where your gas shutoff valve is at, right? You can strap down your water heater. Like there's a lot of things that you can do to secure your home space. From there, you want to start stocking up on items. Um, the three fundamental items that I tell people all the time is water. Water is so important. Like people need to understand that in the next big earthquake, the chances of all clean water, like access to clean water, will be none. Like most water lines get ruptured, so you won't have any access to clean water. And that's why stocking up on water is so important. You know, you have cooking water, drinking water, cleaning water, just water in general is really, really important. From there, you can do things like flashlights, batteries for your flashlights, candles. I never like to recommend candles because fires are a huge problem after earthquakes, especially with ruptured gas lines. You can have an odorless but flammable gas that you have no idea is around, and you're gonna spark ignition, and then you get yourself, you know, a house fire. But you know, solar panel things are really good. And then the last most, you know, third most essential thing is canned food, you know, non-perishable food, because your local grocery store is not going to be working. You know, you're not going to be able to get a McDouble from McDonald's because it's not going to be operating. Yeah,
So basically, have plenty of water, have plenty of canned food, and then obviously do some things like retrofit your house or add like child security things to keep it. Now, you said that during earthquakes, like the water lines break and gas lines. So basically, that's why it's important to have all these things.
exactly. But it's good to stock up on resources that you know, and like I said, power grids will go off. Like you're gonna have no power as well. So that's where the flashlights come in, the lamps, things that give you make your home a little bit, you know, better after that situation.
How big was the Northridge earthquake?
Those are magnitude 6.7.
So the big one would be similar to the Northridge, but a little bit bigger, like close to like 7.9, potentially 8.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring out because you think 6.7, 7.9 are like very close, but they're not. Because a magnitude is measured on a logarithmic scale. So actually, a magnitude 7.9 is about 40 times bigger than magnitude 6.7. Yeah,
Wow.
it's exponentially bigger. So energy wise, you would, you know, and you're in San Andreas, it would be a bigger range, right? Northridge was really just San Fernando Valley, you know, the Northridge area, and then maybe parts of LA felt strong shaking. But as soon as you got to like, you know, East LA and then further east to like Inland Empire, you didn't feel it. San Andreas is a Southern California thing. I mean, every city in Southern California will feel it.
Would feel it. Okay. And then like what can people do? Like let's say that there's an earthquake right now. Like obviously we know what to have in preparation for it. What about like during an earthquake? What should people do and what should people not do?
This is actually a really good point, and something I strongly emphasize is what do you think is people's first nature on when the ground shakes? What do you think that the first thing they want to do is?
Run outside the house?
Run
Like
outside of the house.
that was my
Exactly.
initial reaction. I'm like running.
Yeah, but that's the worst thing to do. Um, that's the worst thing to do here, specifically in California, and here's why. We have excellent building codes and we enforce them. And unless you're in like an unreinforced masonry building or you're in a really old structure, then maybe run. But if you're in any other structure, you drop, cover, and hold on. That's the most important thing you can do when the earthquake happened. About 50% of the casualties in the Northridge earthquake were people trying to run outside. you you people will highly underestimate how strong the ground is shaking. You're more likely to trip and fall. You're more likely to cut yourself with broken glass. You're more likely to fall on something, you know, or have something fall on you, falling debris. That's why you just stay stationary, low center of gravity, get down. If you don't have a sturdy table against the wall with no windows, anything that might fall on you, right? That's where you want to go. And then you just wait till the ground stops shaking. Once the ground stops shaking, that's when you can slowly make your way outside and check on loved ones and family and friends.
What about like under the doors? Is that a good one at all? Like under the door frame, or no? That's kind of what I've heard. Like to get under a door frame because um the it's built better or something.
No, that's also another a myth. That one has
Myth.
been debunked for a while. Yeah, I think that story comes from like old adobe houses in California when they would shake,
Yeah.
everything else would collapse but the door frame. So be like, they're like, oh, maybe that's the strongest part. But in the way our buildings are designed now, you want to just drop cover and hold under a sturdy table. Doorways, no.
What are some of the other myths or misconceptions about earthquakes?
Oh, a good question. Earthquake weather. There's no correlation between atmospheric processes like weather or climate that affect earthquakes, or even try to like induce earthquakes. Now there is a tie-in. Like, let's say we were to get really, like we've been getting really strong rain. And if we were to
Mhm.
have a big earthquake right now, we're more likely to get landslides because those slopes are very saturated with water. We're more likely to get liquefaction, but that rain didn't have it didn't cause or push towards having an earthquake. These are completely two different systems, but there is ways to tie them in. But just one doesn't affect the other.
Now, this may be out of your area of expertise, but you talked about like how the different codes in California started to change, and this will kind of give us an idea as to what year houses to buy. Like, at what point did California building code change to become more strong towards like earthquakes?
So there's no single one date. There's a progression of every decade we're learning more, we're improving our technology. So traditionally, I'd always prefer a house built in the 90s over a house built in the 50s, even though the houses built in the 50s already had the Field Act, which was strong earthquake building codes. But just because technology gets better, supplies get better, we're learning as earthquakes are happening around the world. We're also taking that into account. So traditionally, yes, I'd always go for a newer house. But really, the mark of like building codes started in 1933 after the Long Beach earthquake, which the anniversary was just 3 days ago, 90th year anniversary. So that's kind of the pioneer of building codes, and they just successively have gotten better over the years. Another significant date was 1971, there was a magnitude 6.9 earthquake in the San Fernando Valley, known as the Silmar quake, and that happened on a fault that ruptured through people's houses. It destroyed a hospital, and that's when we said yes, we actually cannot build on top of active faults because when they rupture, they completely obliterate structures. So that's when the Alkist Priolo Act of 1973 came into effect, which prohibits any developers or anybody to build on top of active fault. So you cannot build on top of the San Andreas fault, for say. If you wanted to build a mall, it would not get approved. So that, we do little things to help. You know,
So there are houses right now built on faults, but not any new construction can be built. So basically, if you're buying a house, it's very important that you go to CGS and basically look at where the property line or the fault line is at to make sure that you're not actively on a fault. That way, like, because that would affect the desirability of the property right there
right?
tremendously.
The Northridge fault, we had no idea it existed. Not until it produced that earthquake. So there's always a possibility that there's faults that we don't know about yet that are under people, under cities, under structures, and we won't know
Nobody
until
knows
they.
about them. How do you know that there's a fault there? Like, is that like just because there was some movement there, or are there any other ways of discovering these faults?
So faults are so much easier to discover in the desert because they show signs of like surface offset features. We can also look at like all the earthquakes that happen. Earthquakes happen near faults, and if we're getting consistent earthquakes under the city, a specific city, there's some deformation there that's producing this seismicity. But like in the case of Northridge, we did not know that fault was there, and because that's called a blind thrust fault, so it doesn't make it all the way up to the surface. So there's no evidence of it existing on the surface, but it's definitely exists underground.
That's awesome. Great. I think this has been extremely educational. Is there anything else that you think that would be of value to viewers as it relates to earthquakes or liquefaction?
Um, I just let's see. Yeah, I think just taking the time. I like this quote. I'll leave you with this quote right here. If you can plan a birthday party, you can plan to prepare for the natural disaster.
Big time. And then
Right.
like you said, it's just a matter of time when it's coming. Any indication of when we're going to experience it?
So the big one, right? Let's answer when the big ones come in.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's when the next big earthquake will be. You ready? Tomorrow. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. um, uh, so we use statistical probabilities based on elapsed time since last earthquake. Okay. Um, here's the scary part. We focus on the San Andreas fault, right? But there are other faults that are just as powerful and have the potential to produce a large earthquake, and that might not even be our big one, right? Um, but I with certainty I can say that there's about a 95% probability of a large earthquake in the next 30 years. So you and I will be alive and we will experience this, and it'll happen in our lifetime.
I love
When
it. Good.
exactly, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good enough, you know? Like I think as long as because there's people online that are like, oh, it's coming next week, and it creates like fear and anxiety for people, you know. Obviously, like if you know you can't predict it, then obviously they'll listen to these people and just say, hey, look, what they're saying is false, or they can't they're not accurate on that. So I think that'll be helpful. So I just wanted to say thank you, Bryan, for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time. This is a topic that I was interested in because I've seen videos of California ripping off. I've seen just different things, and I'm like, hey, I own a bunch of properties here in Southern California. Like, should I be concerned about this? Should I be diversifying my portfolio and moving it to different states as well, too? You know, so, for our viewers out there, we had Bryan Castillo. He talked about California earthquakes 2023. We answered when the big one is coming and how to prepare for earthquakes. If you have enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this episode will be valuable for somebody, make sure to hit that share button. And Bryan, thank you again for being on the show, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast. We got to reach out. We got to talk about this stuff. It needs to. People need to hear it. So, I try to do my very best with that. So,
I love it, and I think you're doing a great job. And I forgot this for people that aren't familiar with you. How can people get in touch with you? How can they follow you? How can they keep up with your journey to educate people?
yeah. So if you're okay with it, you can link my Instagram or my TikTok. So yeah, I have my name is Bryan Castillo, but I'm also known as Earthquake Dude, and you can look me up in all socials on Earthquake Dude. And yeah, you'll follow my journey where I teach, educate people, and when we get earthquakes, I'll be talking about it and doing live streams, and I do all that and try to reach as many people. So if you guys are interested, definitely just look up Earthquake Dude. I should be pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and then for our viewers out there, if you're concerned about this, just make sure to prepare. You know, get the water, get the canned food, um, and just prepare. So appreciate you, Bryan, and until next time,
All right, Jose, thank you. Have a good one.
of course.